Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ronja and I am from the Swedish-American Chamber of Commerce here in San Francisco. And today's topic will be about boosting the R&D and innovation cycle by using AI. And for this, we have four super talented speakers who will walk us through this topic. We have Thomas Kia from VIA Licensing. We have Hal Koffelt from Hewlett Packard Enterprises. And we have Linus Retblad from IPscreener and Jiong Choi from VALUENEX. But we're going to start with a question to all of you. So you all did a very great job covering what the R&D and innovation cycle is. But how can we make the R&D activity more efficient? Do you want to kick us off, Linus?
Let's start. I think there's a lot of things you can do in the innovation process, but especially I think it's still, as I see it at least, a lot of ad hoc activities. So not so very structured, and I think it's coming more and more that you build in the platform from the first idea to the product, that you will be able to structure it and go from a personal subjective review to more of a standardized systemized review. And that will not sort of hamper the innovation power and so on. I think that's going to be a support to do more innovation by putting this system into place. And there AI plays a role. I mean, the information overflow today is gigantic. It's not a question of finding the right thing. It's having access to the information. The challenge is to extract the right decisions from it at a very quick pace. So I think that's where we have the greatest benefit.
How about you, Thomas?
I think one comment I would make is, as a person who speaks or is involved more on the licensing side of the matter, I think what always makes that cycle run a little bit smoother is when people who are looking to license their technologies have a good story behind their technology and their IP rights and the process that they went through. It's one thing to go out and with a handful of patents and ask people to take a license to that. It's much more when you can say, well, there are patents, there's a copyright, there's trademarks, there's know-how, there's a whole story here that we were trying to solve a problem. We'll continue to use, if with the money that we make off of this, it will continue to feed back into more research and development. We have great ideas about the future. That I think is a much more compelling story to the people who need the license or who might want a license. And if you can complete that and generate the returns you're looking for, then that's one way to be more efficient, because then the sooner you can find yourself into the research and development stage for the next generation of technology. So my only advice would be just being cognizant of how you are presenting your story to those who want to take a license, and make sure that that's a compelling story that they understand, and that they understand how they fit into the picture of completing the cycle.
Yeah, thank you. How about you, Hal? Do you have a similar opinion?
Yeah, I certainly agree with what Thomas was saying. I think it's kind of the skies are the limit here. It's a very new field. It's a very open field at the moment. Obviously, we're exploring some ideas I was sharing earlier. I think there's a lot of different places within the overall cycle that AI techniques can be applied. That same search technique, for example, can happen at the end of the cycle during licensing, either for assertions or defense. So I think there's a lot of overlap with certain techniques. I also think that we've really just begun to explore the tip of the icebergs here in terms of things that can be done. I know there's at least a couple of examples already where we've even had AIs create an invention, and the Patents Office has been tested as to whether that's something that can actually happen. Can an AI actually create and file and successfully be granted an invention? So I think there's a lot of different ways in which the whole cycle may be fundamentally changed.
Yeah, that's exciting. How about you, Jiong?
And just better understand what's out there. Like Linus and Hal mentioned, in the very beginning of this R&D cycle, you have to just understand what's going on and, how can you really differentiate. So really, having this idea, the knowledge, what's out there, and do your search. Prior search is the good way to do it. with some, AI can boost your search. Yeah, I also heard that this, USPTO, the examiner only had like 8 hours to review the patent. And if you think about the human being can review all those, patent, I think definitely there's limited number to review. So yeah, boosting the process is very important, I guess, with some AI help.
Thank you. So we got a question here. When do you believe it is appropriate for a startup who has capital restraints to make a go, no-go decision on pursuing these types of IP protection development activities? What about for companies looking to expand to new markets they are currently not having exposure in?
Yeah, I always think that it's better to know straight away what the issues are, rather than play naive and go on and take the pain later. If you know, you can early on you can handle it and deviate from it. So I always recommend to gather the information first, and then what you do with it is next step. Especially important if you're moving to a new market. And if you're a startup, I think that coming back to that, I think the sort of information, I mean, 80% of all the technology is hidden in patent information, but it's so complicated. It's written in a way that you need to be a magician or a patent attorney to understand it fully. And there also, AI could be a way more to explain how it is, and you can use it already during ideation, rather than do a check afterwards. So that I think is the earlier the better.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a problem or a challenge that a lot of startups have, which is limited resources. And do you invest it in another headcount? Do you invest it in IP? Do you invest it somewhere else? And I would say, first making sure and taking inventory of the type of IP protection that is most appropriate for your organization. It may not mean a patent, and that's, I think, probably the most resource intensive or capital intensive type of IP protection. But depending on your business, you may get more bang for your buck by pursuing the right type of copyright protection or trademark protection, or keeping things as a trade secret and just being sure that you're doing things that don't jeopardize that as a trade secret. So I wouldn't necessarily have this knee-jerk reaction to say a patent is what I need right away. If it is, then I think it does benefit to look at some of these AI tools to help make sure that you're investing in an area that is going to be worthwhile for you, and to keep in mind too that there are situations where startups gather significant IP and meaningful IP, and if the product business doesn't go well, at least you have the patent. That is a right that you have that can be licensed out again, or it could be sold. So it's another asset class that you have that you can secure in the event that the product business doesn't go well. So that's something to consider as well, that there may be value more long-term for investing in certain patent rights or other IP rights in the beginning.
Yeah. I agree with that entirely. I think the other thing I would suggest to people is make sure you understand exactly what rights patents do give you and what they do not. And look at it from the point of view of ultimately your business. What is it going to do for your business? Is this going to be something where the investment is likely to pay off? And if you can understand how that's likely to pay off, that will help you make a much more informed decision, obviously. The other thing to keep in mind is certainly if you're a company that's just starting out, you don't have any patents at all yet. There are programs. I know the US, for example, has a program where the first 4 patents that you file, you get a highly discounted rate. You get a micro entity, and then you can go beyond that into a small entity. So, they actually give you some breaks as well. Believe it or not, it's one thing the government does do for us on occasion. And so, you fully capitalize on those opportunities as well.
Yeah, also, yesterday, actually, we were talking to the corporate venture capital they were working with in Silicon Valley. Actually, what they asked us to do is evaluate the startup's patent asset. So I think, this is something that they are doing. So to understand what startup have in terms of their technology, actually they're comparing, their own portfolio and see, what the startup says, to see the synergy, overlaps, and just to make sure what they have. So I think for startups, I think it's important, before they raise any funding, just to have, to show what they have, and also, just to show that they're protected. So I think it's the timing and the priority definitely matters, but definitely before you maybe go to the VCs, if you're the hardcore, technology-based company.
Yeah, thank you. That makes so much sense. And this is very valuable. I can imagine for a startup trying to navigate this space must be quite confusing. Yeah, thank you all. Did you have any more comments on this topic?
I think Tom is really nailing it down there. It's patent itself is not the unique tool. It is a toolbox of different things. You have a hammer and a screwdriver and so on. You have to use the right tool, and it might be much more efficient to do trade secrets, for instance, than patents. And it's very often it tends to be that's the thing you're supposed to do, and you do it, but if you don't have a plan for it, it doesn't really make sense. So that was a very good comment.
Yeah, great.
And then on I know there was a second part to that question, which was, how about the issue of expanding to new markets where they don't have exposure in? And I think there's probably a number of ways to answer that question. If it comes to the IP side of it, certainly for larger companies, when they branch off into a new area, they need to consider a variety of issues. And in the IP space, they need to make sure that the existing players in the market, they're protected against them. So for a company moving into a new area, companies will typically adopt a strategy of acquiring patents. So that may mean buying patents on the open market or from other entities in order to have an adequate patent protection, so that they have basically a mutually assured destruction or something, again, that they have leverage against their competitors to help keep them at bay, because oftentimes what keeps companies at peace is just making sure everyone's relatively balanced in the IP, who has the most patents, or everyone's patents are in balance with each other. And so that's part of the process, is for companies moving into new markets, making sure you have the adequate amount of IP protection compared to your competitors, so that you don't expose yourself to risk unnecessarily if you're not able to create that IP for yourself early on.
Also, this can be just general tips, when you are trying to enter into the new market. I think, we have to really think about, outside of box thinking, right? To, see what can be the new potential. And in this era, there's so many, technology conversions are happening. So for example, actually we helped this cosmetic company. So actually it was more for the R&D activities, but they were trying to come up with some new way of making whitening, actually it's the Japanese company, an Asian woman loves this whitening. And they were doing this heavy research on this chemical compounds, but they were like, oh, there's no other way that they can come up with. So actually they changed their mindset and see, okay, what can we find just by, make it white? So actually we can expand it to all this data. And actually the hint was from very different industry. Actually, it was from the automobile industry, because you have to make the car white too, right? And the technology that they found was really just making the surface consistent, so that the reflection of light is better than before. And they just kind of took the idea. So, it's really sometimes those, expanding your scope with the data might help you to see, a different view, and maybe they can open you the new door.
Definitely being well informed. If you're entering a new space, you want to be as informed as possible, right? And that is one area I think that this can be very helpful in, is helping you explore that.
For sure. Thank you. That was some great advice and insight. Thank you all for your answers. I'm going to move on to another question now, which is also for all of you speakers. How are the companies utilizing AI technologies?
Yeah, well, actually, I will answer that with a question, because I don't actually use too much in AI technologies for our work. It's, I think, less common in the licensing area for AI technologies, although I'm sure that's an area people are making efforts in, and I'd be fascinated from other co-panelists if they have ideas on how AI is being expanded into the areas of licensing. But I did actually have a question for Hal. When you were doing your presentation, you had mentioned about how you can take some of the information you receive from an inventor, use some natural language processing to get information back about related documents. Is that ever too much of a good thing, in the sense that you get back documents that maybe you didn't want to see, or too many where you don't have the time to go through it, but you feel like you should? Is it ever kind of something that again is too much of a good thing?
That is certainly a very real possibility, and that's partly why we're exploring it and experimenting a little bit. It's not uncommon that you would find a large number of documents, and it varies also based on the quality of the input, right? I mean, even with AI, natural language processing techniques applied, there's still an aspect of garbage in, garbage out. And so depending on what you start with, you may be asking the wrong question, in essence, and getting the result that you deserve as a result of that. So yeah, there's a very real risk of that, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we have seen some studies on using claims for and finding similar claims, and then apparently those are companies trying to claim the same thing, and then they might be potential licensee takers. So that's taking another round. I don't know how well that works yet, but that has been at least tried out. So there are different ways. I mean, there are a variety. I mean, machine translation for Mandarin, certainly using AI, and the new machine from Google have improved greatly. So we've already been using AI for quite some time without knowing it, because all the translations are there. And now there is effort also for drafting and creating inventions and so on. And also maybe for evaluations of the value, if you compare it to have some semantic analysis to train on what kind of assets are being reviewed in transactions, and try to then see if they apply on the same concepts you're looking at.
Yeah, just to follow on that, one of the things that we did explore a little bit is this notion of taking claims and looking for similar claims. And what we've come to the conclusion of is that is not exactly a perfect science by any means at this point. In fact, claims are complicated to understand, not just because they're written by lawyers, and in a lot of cases they have more of a legalese kind of angle to them that a lot of people find hard to understand. But when you're creating the claims, you can define your own terms, and you can reuse terms in innovative ways as well. And so two people could be saying exactly the same thing and using completely different words and phrases to describe them. And so that makes it very challenging. What we've been seeing is that AI tools are, natural languages included in that, these are typically trained on large databases of data, right? They're great at pattern recognition, but the patterns have to be at least somewhat related or similar in how they were created in the first place. And otherwise, you're probably not going to get great results from it. So you do have to be aware of the limitations of the tools as well, and the current state of the art, and plan that into how you're structuring your use of them.
Also, everything is AI, right? And the definition of AI can be also confusing. But if you define AI as machine learning or deep learning, those type of algorithms, maybe. So what we are doing is some kind of AI. Actually, we have this unsupervised machine learning type of clustering algorithms. And what we can see from our clients are actually very interesting. So for example, investment bank is trying to use this, data visualization, analyzing patent data. So I could have thought, actually, I used to work in investment bank, but this equity research analyst is now trying to analyze patent data to better understand the industry, automobile industry, to see, what's the difference between Honda Motors and Nissan. And based on that knowledge, they want to have better story for the stock market. or the annual report. Actually, we have a very good client, SACC-SF. They're the chemical company, material company. And in their annual report, they included this visualization of their technology using their patent data to better inform the investors, right? Also, Nikkei, actually, we also collaborate with the biggest publisher in Japan so that they can analyze quantum industry with patent data to understand, okay, what's the difference between US, Japan, and China, what they're doing, what they're strong at, and make better story for their newspaper. So this is very just interesting movement, how this one same data set patent, it used to be only for the patent professionals, but now it's extended to investors, the journalism and even marketing. Shiseido, this cosmetic company, also want us to find out, how can I claim this technology is the first, because they want to put this word first sunscreen in their marketing, their event, the campaign, and they want to just make sure that they can proudly say this is the word first. So
absolutely.
A point that Linus and Hal brought up that I thought was really is something I've been hearing a lot about with respect to AI is how important the data, the training set can be. And again, I think a lot of people think of patents, and trade secrets are always there, but people usually don't think of those front and center when they think of IP rights. But what I've been beginning to learn is that trade secrets are becoming much more important, especially in the field of AI, because while you have this AI algorithm, the data that you feed in and the training set that goes in there can be just as valuable. And that is really something that's typically suited as a trade secret. So we could see in the future, as companies are beginning to become sophisticated with AI and develop a treasure trove of inputs and what they feed into their AI systems, that becomes tremendously important, and therefore trade secrets also become very important as well. And so that's some trend that I've been noticing. I don't know if the other panelists have any comments on that in terms of the importance of the training sets.
Actually,
very definitely.
It depends on the algorithm though. So training data is required for this supervised machine learning. Of course, you have to have the training data supervised machine learning. But there's another way, unsupervised machine learning doesn't require the training data set. I think, it really depends on what kind of approach that you're taking and what's the purpose. Definitely, if you're using this supervised machine learning type of algorithm, then you really have to be careful what kind of training data they use, because the output really depends on your input of those training data. So I think it all depends.
Yeah, and taking on it's also when you stop training data, because we have the same situation as in early OCR engines in the 1780s, that in the beginning of the supervised training, it performs greatly and improves fantastically, and then suddenly it drops dramatically. And it's the same thing with these AI systems. If they say, what did you train on? And we train on everything, and the more the better. Then you should start talking about the question to ask is, when did you stop train? When is it optimized? And we always talk about this black box, because in the company, if you train and it trains and you don't measure, you don't know when it's actually going to degrade the performance, and who train on what and when. So this is something that also has to be taken into account. So actually what you're doing. And I think that is a part of systems you should see. When do it start training and when does it stop?
There comes a point in time at which you have so much data that you don't have patterns anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And then you don't know it. They don't need it.
Definitely.
I think the trade secret angle, I think, is also interesting, because that is something that the laws, certainly in the US, have changed recently, and the trade secret protections have improved quite a bit as well. So I would also encourage people, especially the startup question we had earlier, look seriously at which is the best form for you. And trade secret protection is now much better than it used to be, and still may be a very valuable and much lower cost option for you also.
Certainly. Yeah, thank you. I am conscious of the time, but I just want to ask all of you what are some future developments we can expect to see within R&D and the innovation cycle? What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's, you know, at least from the way I described it, it's really pretty scalable for whatever great future technologies come about. I think that, you know, whatever exciting technologies we want to think about, AI itself, virtual reality, you name it, I think it's all stuff that's well suited if we stay to these principles of doing meaningful research and development, being thoughtful about how and what kind of IP rights we secure for ourselves, thinking about licensing and telling, again, that compelling story to a global audience, and just staying true to those principles. I think whatever the future brings us in terms of technology will always be well suited to these general principles.
Yeah, Hal, what do you think?
I agree. I don't think we're going to be putting the patent office out of business anytime soon with an automated equivalent. And it seems unlikely to me that we're going to put patent attorneys out of business either. So those are maybe good career choices for people going forward. But I think that there's a lot of potential here. There's a lot of opportunities. We probably don't even know all the opportunities that exist to deploy this and get benefits out of it in our innovation cycle. And we've talked about a little bit at the front end, and we've talked a little bit about at the back end, you know, things like prior art studies and so on. But I think that's really just the beginning. I think we can start to see it used much more actively day to day as it matures and as we get a little more inventive in how we deploy it.
Yeah, thank you. Linus, what do you think?
No, I think it's not. It's always, we think when new technologies come around, we think of it that as a change, and changes per se often a threat, but it's not really a threat. It's we can take so many technologies that come along, and then before, when they are sort of presented, they don't want to use it. When the automatic gearing came along for cars, there were protests, and how could you have a car gearing automatically? Are you insane? And now the same people will never buy a car with a manual gearing, and how can you sell a manual gearing? I want to drive an automatic one. So AI is going to be just another tool in the toolbox and helping us to handle and cope with the extensive amount of information we have. So that's a necessity to be able to cope. So I don't think, as Hal said, and Tom, it's going to change the work for people within the professions, that's for sure. But it's going to be a lot of work left for us.
Yeah, that's good. And Jion, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Linus. Definitely AI will boost the R&D innovation cycle. And, you know, somebody might, you know, worry about the job, but I think definitely this will augment the people's capability of doing this, you know, making this cycle better and more efficient. And always, I think, you know, having more options is good. Like Tom mentioned, you know, a lot of times, you know, when I see Japanese clients, they're focusing mainly on just making product, making service, but, you know, licensing the technology is really good idea. And I think, you know, you have to really open your mind, you know, to more options. Yeah. You know, licensing or, you know, selling the patent is great ideas and great options to have to boost this cycle.
Definitely. Thank you so much for your answers. Well, I want to actually round off by allowing all of our lovely speakers to say a few final words. So Thomas, if there's anything that you want to share.
Yeah, well, I think, again, one thing I certainly know is that AI has a lot of, again, opportunity, and I look forward to keeping an eye out for how it helps in the world of licensing. And I would reach out to anyone and say, if there are any tools that people are aware of, I would love to know about them. Similarly, if people have questions beyond this presentation, that they have anything that's of interest about what I talked about, feel free to reach out. And I'm always happy to give you my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. And Hal?
Certainly, yes. If people have questions of any of the things that I was covering, feel free to reach out. Happy to have follow-up chats on that. I think I like the word virtuous that Thomas introduced right at the beginning of the call as well. I think that's something important for all of us to keep in mind as we do deploy AI. let's make sure that we're using it in a way that is also responsible as we go forward. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
No, I think it's been really great to be part of this panel, and I think one of the possibilities here is to open up AI helps to read, and that's something we're trying out now. So if you want to try that out to see and give comments and feedback on how it can assist the reading and understanding of that, I would be really appreciating comments on that. So please reach out if you want to see that and comment.
Great. And Jion?
Thank you for the opportunities, and yeah, great to talk to everyone.
Yeah.
So this is my contact information. You can scan the QR code. So if you want to reach out, yeah, please scan the code, and yeah, that includes my contact information. So yeah, I'd love to talk more about if you're interested in. And the background is the radar, the startup landscape that I showed. So if you want to know more about, yeah, please reach out. Thank you so much.
With that, I want to thank you all so much, our speakers, our participants, and wish you a lovely weekend. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Take care. Stay safe.